What's up guys, All Seeing Nap here with yet another video you guys might find interesting. In today's video, I'll be discussing the upcoming Red Dead Redemption 1 remake, and I'll be giving you guys my personal thoughts, both positive and negative concerning it. My script editor is a fan of these games almost as much as I am, so I decided to include his opinions into the mix as well, as I think he has some interesting points to add to the discussion. As always, be sure to subscribe to the channel as not to miss out on any similar projects I have coming up, and without further ado, let's get right into it. To start off, Red Dead Redemption, the original 2010 release for Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3 systems, is a game that has a special place in my heart. In fact, I'd even go as far as to place it in my top favorite games of all time. Now, John Marston was one of the many Sigma protagonists of the early 2010s, along with Kratos from the famous God of War series, Geralt of Rivia from The Witcher 2 Assassins of Kings, Master Chief from Xbox's brainchild IP Halo, and Max Payne from another amazing Rockstar game. What separated Red Dead Redemption from this lineup of characters, however, was that John Marston became a household name virtually overnight. Whereas Max Payne and God of War had 3 games, with Halo having 5 up to that point, you can see just how much of an uphill battle Rockstar had when designing a memorable character who could even come close or surpass his competition. However, it wasn't exactly impossible for them, as with Grand Theft Auto 4 releasing in 2008, Niko Bellic had already cemented himself as a force to be reckoned with when it came to one-shot protagonists. With Red Dead Redemption releasing just 2 years later, Rockstar showed the world that they are not a one-trick pony when it comes to character design or story writing, as everyone fell in love with our greasy-haired bounty hunter almost immediately to critical acclaim. So having prefaced this, what are some of the things I love about the first Red Dead Redemption? Well, for starters, I love how the game is mostly its own fleshed-out story. Don't get me wrong, the second game is a masterpiece in and of itself. However, the first game's story is just completely unique. Sure, Red Dead Redemption does have its fair share of references to established Western media, just like Red Dead Redemption 2, particularly to the Wild Bunch, which also takes place around the same time as the first game, but also that nearly everything about Red Dead Redemption is completely unique and distinguishable from that of its sequel. The second game does use a ton of movie references for its selection of missions, such as from The Assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, Django Unchained, and Open Range. Other than Red Dead Redemption being a period piece and its obvious aesthetic homage to the Dollars trilogy from spaghetti western films, its story is still relatively unique and distinct from all of those, which provides ample opportunity for John's character to be chiseled to perfection the way Rockstar wanted. The soundtrack for Red Dead Redemption is also another unique thing about the game. Every time I load up the second game, I can't help but reminisce about the better scores it had over it. Red Dead Redemption 2's Revenge is a Dish Best Eaten, Blood Feuds, Ancient and Modern, and American Venom composed by Woody Jackson are some of my favorites, but they are only a select few that I've liked compared to Red Dead Redemption's entire OST, which blows Red Dead Redemption 2 out of the water in terms of ambient, wanted, comeback, or specific mission music. The twang of the guitar commonly demonstrated by the same composer, Woody Jackson, still to this day sends shivers down my spine whenever I listen to it. But it feels like there's just something missing when it comes to how he composed the second game's soundtrack. I've said all that so that you guys can understand where I'm coming from when I speak about the remake, and what I want to and don't want to see happen. This section will be discussing what I don't want Rockstar to change about the remake. For the most part, anyone who's played Red Dead Redemption, especially if introduced to it by way of the sequel, can admit that John's voice, the way he speaks, and the vocabulary he uses are incredibly different compared to the second game. John's voice in the first game has grit and age to it, with a sort of rasp, which fits in with not only his age but his experience. There's been talk of Rockstar tweaking and changing the dialogue in the remake, and I really hope they don't actually change it so much that it takes away from the charm it had in the original. Another very serious and important point I have to add to this is that people who have played the first game immediately after the second will notice that characters like Sean, Arthur, Pearson, and Micah were not conceived before the release of the second game, and John has moments in the game where he talks about his past, making no mention of them. I'm sure that in order for Rockstar to tie both of these games in better and fix the glaring issue, they will no doubt have additional dialogue ready to patch up the disconnect between them and the remake. But what I'm worried about is that it's going to seem out of place and unnatural, too obvious that they forced it in. Rob Weethoff is the one who voiced John 13 years ago at this stage. His voice could have changed in ways that don't necessarily have the same fidelity as he did that time ago. Or he may not bring the same amount of energy into the remake as he did for the original, so the dialogue might have to be done from scratch if that's the case. Those who have started the first game would probably be familiar with the fact that the dialogue in the first game wasn't as crisp and clean as the second game, likely because the lines were recorded in a basement. Fuck, I didn't mean that literally though. That's something that's never bothered me, but I can see why Rockstar would be hard-pressed to keep it the way it was, considering how much technology and gaming as a whole has advanced this past decade, which is why I'm not expecting everything to be one-to-one, as it was a remake and not a remaster after all. I had mentioned before that the original game's soundtrack was very unique and important to me. This is one thing I definitely do not want them to change with the remake. Red Dead Redemption 2's soundtrack was more ambient and focused on complementing the cinematography it had going for it, but Red Dead Redemption's had a much more different focus, that being on making the game feel like a spaghetti western. Like I mentioned with the dialogue though, I am almost positive that the soundtrack will be reworked as well, as it does tend to feel more outdated compared to the current standards in video games. I bring these things up because I am also not sure how enthusiastic Rockstar will be to be tasked with another Red Dead game. Some of you may know that there was a controversy back in 2018 around the fact that Rockstar was overworking their employees to get Red Dead Redemption 2 out on deadline. Red Dead Redemption 2 was a huge game to make, extremely so, but there was a ton of cut dialogue, secrets, and missions that just couldn't make it into the final product because of the fact. According to Games Radar, Dan Houser, the co-founder of Rockstar, admitted that employees were being worked 100 hours per week just before the game's release. What I'm really worried about is that on top of totally reworking the soundtrack and dialogue from the original, they might also fuck it up or cut corners with those reworks if Rockstar plans to suffocate its employees to release on deadline again. Now let's talk about one very important thing Red Dead Redemption had going for it that sets it apart from this day. I have to repeat myself again. I love Red Dead Redemption 2, but I'm not going to lie to you guys and say that these games look and feel the exact same as each other, because they really just don't. We have to be honest with ourselves here. It's obvious to anyone that at a glance, Red Dead Redemption 2 is the cleaner, more graphically advanced and polished game of the two. It's also cleaner in other aspects too, such as textures, skin, and clothing. A lot of the clothes you have in the game are clean, lacking in tears, grime, and other such intricate details. The clothes you get in Red Dead Redemption, on the other hand, have all sorts of dirt and grit on them. John's elegant suit from Blackwater has visible sweat stains around the collar, while the pants have dust on the fringes of the legs, which give the outfit more character and depth. The Walton's gang outfit has torn sleeves, tucked-in boots, and a mangy stovepipe hat. Every poncho we get in the game is riddled with bullet holes. It's clearly seen combat. This isn't even just limited to clothing, but these extra details can be seen all over the game. Most of the buildings look worn, bullet-riddled, and or partially destroyed and defaced. The trains look old and rusted, while the carriage looks as though they're on their last legs. Red Dead Redemption is supposed to be ugly, both in how it looks and in context to the dark story and its telling. What I really hope is that Rockstar doesn't try to make the remake look as polished and sanitized as Red Dead Redemption 2 was. I want to see the sweat stains on the collars, and I want mangy looking hats that fit the theme the original was going for. The same aesthetic reflected the society of the early 20th century Western United States. It was cold and unforgiving, and for once in John's life, unlike in Red Dead Redemption 2, he sees humanity for what it is and the world through a pragmatic understanding rather than through rose-tinted glasses. Now, this is the section where I had hoped, prior to writing the script for this video, to provide insights from John's voice actor Rob Weithoff on the remake and include his thoughts here. But unfortunately, due to contractual obligations, I could not get him to fulfill that request as of this moment in time. This may be subject to change in the future, and if it does, you guys can be sure I'll make a video on it, but unfortunately as of right now, this contract, which he may have signed because he was recast for the remake, or after the release of Red Dead Redemption 2, simply does not permit him to speak on inside matters. Instead, like I mentioned in my introduction, my script editor, who goes by the YouTube name Alice in Wonderland, has additional insights he wants to share, so I'll present them right now. So, my script editor isn't a stranger when it comes to remakes and remasters, as he's played a bunch of games from his childhood days that have gotten those treatments. He loves the Red Dead franchise, but aside from that, he plays a lot of Souls games. The most recent remake that came to his mind when he heard about the Red Dead Redemption remake is the Demon's Souls remake, developed by Bluepoint Games. Having played both the original made by FromSoft on the PS3 and the remake by Bluepoint several times each, he has a pretty good understanding on what to expect from a remake. Now the Demon's Souls remake is unique in that it has gotten a lot of praise, but also a lot of criticism. The criticism has come from fans who played the original first back in the day, not anyone who's played the remake for the first time, which is why this comparison is very applicable to the Red Dead Redemption, as it's faced with the same issues that the remake will likely have. Objectively, the Demon's Souls remake was received very well, and was responsible for selling PS5 systems, especially during the lockdown days. It was a success in many ways, and overall people were happy that they got to experience the game for the first time, or again, but with a new slick coat of paint. However, it was to be expected that the die-hard fans of the original who played it religiously back in the day would have been disappointed or even shunned it. Their criticism of the remake was that it was so new and so modern that it completely managed to strip away the atmosphere and aesthetic of the original game. To them, Bluepoint had no understanding of what made Demon's Souls truly Demon's Souls. Hidetaka Miyazaki, the director of the game all the way back in 2009, was hailed for his unique and oppressive dark fantasy art style that he used throughout the game. This included the use of darker colors, grayer skies, and a striking style of architecture that pervaded the level layouts. Things like the castles having rectangular shapes, a lack of foliage or artwork on its walls, the skies being bled of color and clouded, blotting out the sun and keep it with the theme of the game, and certain areas looking downright abominable and grimy. The creatures that you fight also have particular designs to them. They're not just generic monsters from a typical fantasy game. Their design serves a purpose to the overarching story, and they complement the environments they're in, so nothing feels like it's out of place. To these fans, Bluepoint had committed the cardinal sin of disregarding all of that and making the game lose touch with itself, thereby creating a dissonance with the remake and that of the original vision. To them, the remake is much brighter, has more color everywhere, and feels and looks more cinematic compared to the original, with the better graphics completely replacing the art style that made it stand out from the crowd back in the day. According to them, terrible changes were made to the monsters as well, making them look more generic and out of place, with attempts to humanize some of them by giving them more detail that they didn't deserve. On top of that, the soundtrack was entirely overhauled, and the dialogue had to be reworked and actors had to be recast for their roles, so not even that couldn't be properly preserved. While Alice in Wonderland doesn't really agree with these criticisms and thinks they lack merit and intellectual honesty, he does understand that not everyone will be pleased with something that is reworked to such an extent that it can deviate, according to them, so much from the original vision. It really just might be another Demon's Souls case with this remake. However, there is one important difference that needs to be stated here. That the Demon's Souls remake was relegated to a completely different studio, whereas Rockstar themselves are in charge of the Red Dead Redemption remake. No matter how different the remake turns out to potentially be, it can't possibly be so different that it creates a dissonance with the original vision in this case. Taking a look at another remake which recently came out, that being The Last of Us Part 1, we see that it's virtually the exact same game with almost nothing changed except for improved PS5 appropriate graphics. The gameplay is the exact same, as is the atmosphere and the design philosophy behind the characters and the enemies that you engage with. This remake was done by the exact same developing studio, Naughty Dog, who, even a decade apart from the release of the original, clearly understood their own game and didn't feel like it was necessary to make that many changes to it. Rather, they just wanted to ship the same product with superior graphics for full price all over again. While this is great, I'm not sure that a lot of fans of the original agree it is. It runs into the problem of just being that. The same game from a decade ago, but with better graphics that you pay full price for. And full price is steep these days, in this economy. It begs the question, would a remake like that, should Rockstar really go down that path, really be worth buying? Sure, the shiny graphics of the remake will blow you away and re-immerse you into the game like never before, but for how long? Novelty only stays novel for a short amount of time, except in some fringe cases of games just being so good that they feel new even decades later. He believes that if we're going to truly get a remake that we're going to love unilaterally, then Rockstar needs to make changes in place only where changes are merited and leave the rest of the game as is, preserved properly. Changes such as quality of life improvements, removing jank from the animations, better checkpointing, much more intuitive quest trackers, better designed mini-map, more detailed descriptions, that kind of stuff. Stuff that keeps things fresh but doesn't ruin any part of the actual experience. But those are just my 2 cents, and I felt like I needed to get this off my chest sooner or later, as I'm very passionate about this franchise and want nothing more than to see it be the best that it can be. It might be interesting to some of you guys that I have all these worries in the first place, because Rockstar is such a good studio and they've been dropping good game after good game, and you might be right. But that doesn't mean that just because they aren't dropping any stinkers that they're going to keep this impressive record going forever. It's important to have the right mindset and the right expectations when being hyped about something, especially if it's something you love. Thank you for watching this video, guys. Be sure to let me know your thoughts in the comments and if you liked what you saw. Please like it as it helps the channel out. This has been All Seeing Nap, all seeing y'all in the next one.